Hi, and welcome to the Caterpillar Cross Stitch YouTube channel. My name's Ford from Son of a Stitch, and this week I'm going to be talking about one of the topics that brings up the most questions in the online cross-stitching communities that I'm in. And that is the topic of sizing. How big is this project going to be? How big of a piece of fabric do I need? And how big of a frame is it going to fit in when I'm done? Are among the very commonly asked questions that I see. So today I'm going to teach you how to figure out all of those. Now here at Caterpillar Cross Stitch, we are all about cross stitch, and we upload helpful and, hopefully, entertaining videos about it every single week. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next knowledge drop. Hit that little bell icon so you'll get a notification every time there's a new video as well. In particular, if you like this video, give it a like and leave me a comment down below so I know I should make more content like it. And if you have a question that you'd like me to see answer on the channel, put that in the comments as well. I want to take a moment to remind you to join the Caterpillar Cross Stitch VIP Stitch Club. When you join, you'll get 10% off your first order, you'll get a digital ebook with 8 free cross-stitch patterns in it, and you'll get a digital download with our top 10 cross-stitching tips. So hit the link down there in the description so that you can get all of those excellent perks. Now, figuring out project sizing is one of the most confounding parts of this hobby for most stitchers, regardless of their level of experience. So it's no wonder it's one of the most commonly asked questions that I see online. Remember in school when certain students would ask the teacher, "Why do I need to learn algebra? I'm never going to use that in my daily life." Turns out we were very wrong. So let me show you how to calculate how big a project is going to be and then what you can do with that information. So the way we figure out how big our project is going to be when it's finished is simply to divide the size of the pattern in stitches by the density of the fabric. That's how many stitches per inch on the fabric. That is also known as its count. So you see things described as 14 count fabric, 16 count fabric, etc. So imagine we're going to do a project that is 70 stitches . This information should be provided to you on the pattern. Any designer who knows what they're doing is going to give you that information either on the package for the pattern or on the online listing if you're buying it online. If it doesn't have that, be very, very careful. So say our imaginary project is 70 by 70 stitches, and we want to know how big it's going to be on 14 count, 16 count, or 18 count fabric. We want to know how changing the count of the fabric is going to affect the size of that project. So we have a width and a height, which is why we have 2 dimensions on our fabric. So if we're going to do it on 14 count, all we need to do is divide 70, which is our pattern size, divided by 14, which is our fabric count. So 70 divided by 14 is 5. On 14 count fabric, that's going to end up 5 by 5 inches. Now to figure that out in centimeters, we just multiply it by 2.5. And that's how we get the centimeter size, 12.5 by 12.5. Now, if we want to do it on 16 count, what we need to do is divide 70 by 16. Probably can't do it in your head, you might need a calculator, but I already did the math ahead of time. Going to wind up with a project that is 4 3/8 or 4.375 by 4.375 inches. And if we go into slightly higher count or more dense fabric, then we wind up with about 3.9 inches, so just under 4. So as you can see, as the count of the fabric increases, the size of the project decreases. So if you need it to fit into a smaller space or into a smaller frame, you stitch it on a higher count fabric. Now to throw a slight monkey wrench in here, suppose you're stitching on something like 32 count or 28 count fabric. Sometimes you'll see people say that they're stitching over 2 on 28 count fabric or over 2 on 32 count fabric. What that means is that instead of filling in every little square with an X like this, they're actually going to go over 2 threads with each X. So that each X that you create, instead of filling in every tiny little square of the fabric weave, is going to be actually filling in 4 squares, because you go over 2 squares with each half stitch that you do. That's why it's called over 2. So if you were doing 32 count fabric this way, the description actually helps you understand what you're doing. 32 over 2 is an effective 16 count fabric, 16 stitches per inch. So you would calculate your size as though you were doing 16 count. If you did 28 over 2, you'd calculate your size as though you were doing 14 count, because that's how many stitches per inch you are going to make. 16 stitches per inch over 2 on 32 count, etc. Now I love making these YouTube videos and sharing my cross-stitch knowledge with the world, but when it comes down to it, I'm just one guy with a camera in a room, so I can't really answer every question that people might have. Imagine if there were a room that you could go to where there were 18,000 cross-stitchers, varying levels of experience from every possible imaginable background. That's what it's like at the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Facebook group. There's tons of people in there that are more than happy to share their knowledge, providing people with tips and hacks and project ideas and finishing ideas, so it's a really excellent community to hang out in, and I highly recommend that you go join. In addition to that, I'd recommend that you follow the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Instagram feed. A lot of the same discussions happen there, and it's a really great place to hang out, learn more about the craft, and get some excellent ideas for projects. When it comes to figuring out the size of fabric that you're going to need, you're going to start with the size of your project. So I'm going to imagine that we're using this one here. We've got a 70 by 70 project. We're going to do it on 14 count fabric. And we know it's going to end up at 5 by 5 inches. But in order to actually be able to stitch that and frame it, so this is our project, we need to have some extra fabric all the way around. Now, most people recommend 3 inches of extra fabric, which is a lot. On a smaller project, it seems like a whole lot. On a bigger project, it doesn't seem like quite such a big deal. So imagine we're doing this 5 by 5 project. In order to have room to put our hoop on there, and in order to have room to put it on the frame, we need to give it 3 extra inches all the way around. So since we're adding 3 inches to the top and 3 inches to the bottom, it means we're adding a total of 6 inches to the fabric altogether. So we have 3 inches here, 5 inches here, 3 inches here. We add those all up, we're going to get a total of 11 inches that the fabric needs to be. And the same here. 3 plus 5 plus 3 is 11 inches. So to stitch a 5 by 5 project with the recommended 3 inches of extra fabric on each side, we actually need a piece of fabric that totals 11 inches by 11 inches. Now, if our finished project were going to be more like 10 by 10 inches, for instance, we'd add 3 plus 10 plus 3, and we'd wind up with a total of 16 inches. So the shorthand way that you can do this is, once you find out your project size, you can just add 6 to each of these numbers to get the optimal size that you can get. Now, sometimes your fabric's not quite big enough, or it's hard to find just the right one, so you can be flexible on that a little bit. But the smaller that allowance that you give yourself is, the harder the project is going to be to stitch, and the harder it is going to be to finish. Now that we understand how to calculate how big the project is going to be, we need to figure out how big of a frame it's going to fit in. The thing that you really need to understand here with the frame is that the actual opening of a frame is always going to be smaller than the labeled size of the frame. An 8 by 10 photo frame, for instance, is designed to display an 8 by 10 photo. But if the opening were the same size as the photo would just fall right out. So you need to have some overlap so it will stay in the frame. That overlap by industry standard is 1/4 of an inch on each side. So since that gets doubled, just like with our allowances for fabric, an 8 by 10 frame that's labeled with 8 by 10 will actually have an opening of 7.5 by 9.5. So if you make a stitch that's almost exactly 8 by 10 inches, it's actually going to get cut off a little bit by an 8 by 10 frame. So that's something to keep in mind when choosing the frame size for your project, is that the actual sizing of the frame is going to be almost always half an inch, about 13 millimeters. Is that right? Is always going to be half an inch, about 13 millimeters, smaller than the labeled or nominal size of that frame. So if you want to fit a project in a 5 by 7 frame, the project will need to be smaller than 4.5 by 6.5. Likewise, a 4 by 6 frame will only hold up to a 3.5 by 5.5 inch project. So that's something that you really need to keep in mind when picking out a frame or choosing what count of fabric to do your project on, so that you can make sure it'll fit. So that's it. That should be all you need to know in order to be able to figure out the size of a project. Next time somebody online is asking how big is this going to be when it's done, you'll be able to explain the calculation to them like a real pro. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, I'm Ford, and I'll see you next time.